our Envolve Social ESG webinar with diversity and inclusion. So my name is Emer and I'm part of the marketing team here in Envolve. And I'm joined today by two brilliant people, Laura and Ed. So I already feel the energy in the room already when they're very passionate both about this topic. So I'll just start by introducing our lovely moderator, Miss Laura Thompson. So Laura is the director of phenomenal training, and not only this, but she's also a TEDx speaker. So Laura is a leadership trainer with a background in psychology, and she designs and facilitates workshops as well as culture change programs and speaking at conferences with a particular focus on health, safety, and well-being. So very kind of appropriate for this topic today. And she's a busy lady because not only this, but she's also the founder of Secrets from a Coach podcast. So you should really check these out. They're really, really insightful and they address her and her colleague really interesting topics. So now I would love to introduce my guest speaker, Mr. Ed Jervis. Ed is the CEO and Chief Disruptor of Inclusion Crowd. So Ed works with clients globally from complex multinationals to regional startups and nonprofits. So himself and his team have a really passionate mission to make organizations reflective of the societies in which they operate. So he's also involved in leadership development and is involved in executive elite coaching, as he believes that culture starts from the top and they create psychological safety and enable peak performance to drive real diversity, equity, and inclusion results within the workplace. So it's fair to say you're all in really safe hands with these two amazing experts in their fields. So I just want to let everyone know that you please to send in any questions that you might have either through the Crowdcast chat there or else it's also live on LinkedIn. So you can get us there as well and be sure to address your questions after the at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will hand over to yourself, Laura and Ed, to go ahead. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Ed, how exciting. This is such a big, hot topic. I'd love for you to share with us all what got you into this world of diversity and inclusion. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so my name's Ed Jervis, and it is a pleasure to be with you all. So thanks so much for having me. In terms of my personal story, so I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. That in itself is a backdrop of what happens when inclusion and diversity goes wrong. From sectarianism to political discourse to conflict to discrimination to all of the component parts that we see featuring in what would be sort of modern inclusion and diversity issues. So sort of a sort of political backdrop to inclusion and diversity. So not only did I grow up in Northern Ireland with that as a backdrop, but I grew up as a gay Catholic, so Catholics being the minority group in Northern Ireland, and all of the complex issues that surround being a minority. I grew up as a Catholic in a Protestant town within Northern Ireland. So again, how to navigate, living, in communities as a minority, and then of course being gay within Catholicism isn't the sexiest move, really, is it? So it's not a cool set of circumstances. So sort of that balancing of how to navigate within my own community and how my own community sits within a broader set of issues really was where I cut my teeth on how we get into a range of these issues. Then from a career perspective, my background is transformation and change. And of course, there's a beautiful synergy between transformation and change. How do we go from where we are today to where we want to be, versus that backdrop. From a family perspective, I'm married. My husband is from Malaysia. He's Muslim, so he has a range of religious issues based on his sexual orientation that are similar but a different flavor to Catholicism. And we've just adopted our son, a little boy as well. So as a family, we're a pretty sort of global blended family. So that gives me sort of some insight into the issues and where I get my passion from.
At the very least, we have to go for a night out, Ed.
Absolutely. Listen, anytime. I'm always up for that.
I bet the stories and the learning. Wow, gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. And I always think to understand the kind of context just means we can really, see how this is not a facade. This isn't something that you've suddenly thought, oh, I know, let's jump on a bandwagon. This is absolutely from the heart, which leads me into one of the phrases that Emma used in the intro to you: psychological safety. So what do you mean by that? When it's present, what's the benefit? When it's absent, what's the impact?
Right. So, I mean, and from a definition perspective, it's really the ability to fail, isn't it? It's creating a space where we can feel free to fail. We fail all the time when we're learning, when we go through education, when we're learning new skills, new tasks, from a children's perspective and how we teach. You fail, you learn, you adapt. You fail, you learn, you adapt. And so creating psychological safety is that ability where people feel that they can be themselves, they can be authentically themselves, they can contribute as themselves, coming from a position of where they're currently at. That might be that they are in a position where they're not fully abreast of the topic. It may be that they're on a learning curve. It may be that they're experts in that topic. But how we collectively feel that we can engage in a group, corporate setting or whatever, that's where we specialize in this psychological safety. So it's the ability for me to create a safe space, an environment where we are encouraging and actively engaging with a breadth of experiences, backgrounds, knowledge, opinions. And part of the issue for me in creating psychological safety is it's become a bullshitty phrase that gets thrown around about feeling safe within organizations. And actually, it's a really complex, difficult thing to do, because to your point about why we give that background to ourselves and so on, because it lacks often authenticity. So do I believe that you're creating psychological safety, or are you telling me that this is a psychological safe space? And the only way we can do that is demonstrating through example. So what happens? What's the consequence? How am I treated? How are my opinions, my ideas treated, and so on. So it's an art in itself, and yet there's a nuance to it very quickly that I'm just going to throw in there as well while you've got me on it, which is toxic positivity and toxic negativity, right? And so that
tell us about that and
toxic positivity. Yeah, so toxic positivity is where we create environments where you can't bring anything negative. So typically we see it in high performance environments, sales environments, target driven environments, in certain aspects, C-suite, where we're on a mission, we're so pumped, we're on a direction, we're all going over here, and we're going to win. And the problem with creating psychological safety is, like life, there is a spectrum of emotions. And if your organization does not allow for the full breadth of human emotions and only allows for what are seen as attractive ones, like positivity, team player, only saying the right things, then you will never create that psychological safety, and you'll be playing at it. And that comes from graft and authenticity, in my view.
I love it. God, you articulate it so clearly. I love it. Let's now put that under the lens of the diversity and inclusion lens. So to what extent does diversity, inclusion or exclusion, to what extent does that lens impact that healthy culture and particularly that psychological safety? So what's the direct link that you see between inclusion and diversity and that psychological safety, that healthy positivity?
Yeah, brilliant question. So the first thing to define is the difference between inclusion and diversity, right? They both get thrown out so often in the same breath within organizations, and they're totally different. So what we're speaking to in this first instance is this whole piece of creating inclusion. What does that look like? Now, that can be built up off the diversity of the folks that are in there, but it can be diversity of thought, it can be diversity of experience, it can be a whole range of characteristics, topics, experiences that come together to create an environment. So for me, in terms of the D&I lens, we do better when we include more voices, when we include more experiences, when we have challenge to our opinion. You know, every thought that we have is not necessarily correct. And from a psychological perspective, we need to be challenged on that. We need to be peer reviewed on that. And the problem is that it's a pain in the ass, because it's much easier if we have a team that says what we want to hear. We're so busy, we're so under the pressure, we've got targets, we've got delivery, we've got all of the amazing things that our organization is going to change the face of our clients' expectations in the world. And we get caught up in the fact that, do we have time for challenge? Do we have time for diversity of thought? Do we have time for all of those things? The reality is that organizations that can harness that and are smart enough to be able to create environments, nuance, you've also got to make sure that you have the ability to manage diverse talent. And that's something that's overlooked as well. There's no point in having, wanting to attract diversity into your fish pond, but you haven't changed the water. So you've got a dirty tank. So you got to make sure that the organization is prepped and ready for all of this. And that can be a whole science and problem in itself, making sure that people managers, and management grades across the organization can actually manage this, because it's unfair on them and it's unfair on the talent that you're bringing in. So that's the sort of D&I lens that I take on it, is that we're looking for innovation, we're looking for creativity, we're looking for high performance. It's a difficult thing to achieve. It needs careful consideration around management. It can be very annoying, from a day-to-day perspective, but the upside is what we're looking for here. Peak elite performance.
Peak elite performance. I love it. I mean, I've often wondered, at what cost efficiency? So in the pursuit of having a business as usual, an efficient operation, everything working like a sort of ticking over like a machine, at what cost is that? So, is creativity, the opportunity for these kind of chance conversations or chance perspectives from different people? Want to pick up on what you were saying around an organization getting ready. So to what extent, it would be great if you could share anonymously, of course, any best practice or worst practice that you've seen around encouraging different languages, different people to be able to actually communicate and connect. So anything that you could give our audience as maybe some things to watch out for around the very practical element of language and understanding each other.
Right, absolutely. So communication comes up as, within the top 5, certainly, key issues. Everybody thinks that we send emails out and that is communications. We have some staff network group and that is engagement. And actually the issue that comes up most often is this one-way communication. And really it's just information sending, isn't it? It's just dissemination of message. It's not actually understanding that heartbeat, that voice of the organization. And so that is a critical element. Around 9 times out of 10, communications is inadequate to have a complex conversation like, how are we prepping and engaging our business for high performance through inclusion? Big topic, rubbish sort of infrastructure around comms and engagement. So that is absolutely, a key element in terms of what we need to prep for. Part of to your point, or to your question about some of those concerning elements, is when organizations just want to throw money at a problem. I want to have gender parity by 2025. I want to have, equality, parity from a pay, from a race, from whatever protected characteristic. And then you unpack the explanation, the plan, the strategy around, well, what are you seeding today, the next 6 months, 12 months, in order for us to get there? Because we can't backwards engineer the solution without starting from wherever you're at today. And there's a sector pressure, there is a client pressure, there's a societal pressure for us to be better. And so we see some knee jerking. And to your original point about psychological safety, we've got to make organizations feel safe enough to say, our performance isn't where it needs to be. I know we've done some performative stuff because ultimately we're not going to win new business. Ultimately, we're going to look bad in our sector. So we've got to have a bake sale for Pride or staff network groups or, you know, unconscious bias training or whatever we're going to throw at it. But we need to make them safe enough to have a proper systemic institutional conversation around performance. Where do you want to be? And while I'm ranting, that's part of the issue is if you ask, please define for me the problem. That is a key question when we look at these topics. What is it you're trying to solve? And it's a messy, difficult one that often gets, you know, a couple of intakes of breath and you know, spit out some you know, responses off a people report or, you know, HR objectives or whatever. But it's a really critical piece, as you know, from a change management perspective, from a you know, a performance improvement perspective. I couldn't go into a sales meeting and say, I don't know what the problem is, but would you do us a favor, release some budget, we'll throw some cash at it. And over the next sort of 5-10 years, we'll be better than we are today. That is a career limiting conversation. And so we've got to get real when it comes to D&I conversation and apply the same commercial logic. What is it you're trying to solve? Is that definition nuanced enough? Across all of the characteristics, you're really getting into the detail, the different characteristics, the levels at which they are at in the organization, their progression, their succession, the talent attraction, you know, big stuff. Can you define it? And if you can't, that's where you start. Before you start throwing training, before you start throwing cash, you know, a whole range of stuff, at a systemic sort of strategy perspective at C-suite and above, or at C-suite and certainly senior management and above, you need to be able to define the problem.
Do you know, every day in 2022, there have been 336 billion emails sent around the world. 72% get held at the spam filter. But I think what is just a reminder is that actually just sending out a couple of this is what's coming emails is kind of, you know, that's the first sort of step. Also, my experience of running, I'm sure like yourself, loads of sessions, nothing gets an adult feeling more reluctant to attend some training by it being called mandatory training. That M word, mandatory training. So it's amazing how just the language, even from the invite process, whether this is something that I'm looking forward to or whether I'm eye rolling with my colleagues, you know, in the restaurant, it's, you know, it's incredible the impact the language has. So let's kind of really land this from a manufacturing point of view. So what are you seeing around you are some trends that are concerning you that maybe from someone in the manufacturing sector would be worthwhile getting their heads in the gear for this one. So what are you seeing here in 2022? What's either right here or around the corner that particularly from a manufacturing sector point of view is worth a think? So for those people listening live in on this, what would be 3 things, for example, that you would highly recommend people look out for that are concerning you from your perspective?
Yeah, so the first thing is panic. So, and it's underpinned by the fact that we can't do those things that we've just described. So they are really relevant to this sector. You know, can you define the problem from a manufacturing perspective around what it is you're trying to solve? Can you articulate it? Can your management teams articulate it? Can your recruiters and your hiring managers articulate it? And if you haven't spent the time and the energy to creating a roadmap, a conversation, or at least starting that internal dialogue about what is it that we want to, you know, how do we want to look in 2022, 2025, and an honest internal reflection on where you haven't got the answers, where you haven't got the expertise, to reach out to the likes of yourself, myself, industry folks who deal with this from a day-to-day perspective. So as vague as that is, it's critical. You know, are you having a real internal senior level conversation around where you want to be, what the current organization looks like, and what you are trying to achieve? The second thing for me is data. It's complex depending on geographies. Again, you know, you can reach out for support in this, but actually, do you know what your organization looks like? Surprisingly, particularly across the FTSE 350, you know, only about, you know, 50, possibly 60% of organizations capture, the beyond gender data, ethnicity data, really low. Again, that comes from how you're engaging, so that comms piece and how the channels in which we're using, the trust that people have in the organization to disclose. Why would they disclose to you? You're not demonstrating any ability, you know, you're not demonstrating any performance and so on. So why would people engage and disclose with you? Again, you need to do a piece of work behind that to getting the organization engaged and you know, in a space where they trust you with this information. And then looking at some of the key aspects. And there's some challenging stuff, particularly in sectors where C-suite roles or senior level roles don't come up very often. So what does mobility look like? What does succession look like? What does progression look like? And what activities are you doing to internally seed your pipeline? So it would be a shame if you're having this conversation now and in 2025 you're still going out to sector to find this talent, whether that's, you know, from a range of the underrepresented characteristics, and you haven't been seeding it within your own organization. So what are you looking at in terms of development opportunities for underrepresented demographics? And we've got to look at things like maternity, paternity. You know, people are often shocked about the fact that we don't have women in senior positions, but yet we tax them at every stage of their career for, you know, having children, same as primary caregivers, but typically women, you know, for having children and for having caring responsibilities within the family. You know, we cut their careers dead over those periods and then try to bring it back to life as they come back into the workplace. And so unless we're having a serious conversation about terms, conditions, how we would shake senior female talent out of the trees that they're currently in, then you're going to keep knocking your head against the wall with these key issues, particularly in sectors like manufacturing.
Yeah. And just a quick one, just to nip in on that one. What would be some things that practically you've seen have really helped transform the energy around encouraging women into some of those senior roles? So what might be one or two practical things that you've seen that for you would get a real kind of thumbs up that's worked?
Yeah, flexibility. So COVID has actually been helpful in certain circumstances around flexibility of working, you know, that ability to make sure that we are being sensible about output versus location and how we measure output based on where that is. So absolutely, you know, T's and C's that encompass flexibility of working. So that would be one. The other would be, as I say, around paternity and maternity. You know, I think we need to be really pushing for organizations and HR departments to be brave around maximum benefits around maternity. And also I love use it or lose it for men from a paternity perspective, so that we're sharing some of that within that, because we've got to ultimately
Oh, I think we've just lost him. Oh, what a shame. I'm guessing he's there. Oh, phew.
I'm there. I got cut off. So yes,
love it. And I'll tell you what, Ed, having been there, done it, there's no panic quite like it, where you've got a meeting that is overrunning at 5 to 6 and you know you've got till 6 o'clock childcare and there's no way you're going to make the drive. So
and people really underestimate that. You know, we've got to be adult about this conversation and say that, Jesus, this is 50% of the population. This is within you know, a huge proportion of families across you know, all sectors, and we're still having these really old-fashioned you know, conversations about some issues that we really just need to move the dial on and get over it.
Your whole real family kind of hidden in the closet behind your working door, you know, trying to pretend that you're this machine.
In my house, 2 dogs. All of that.
Oh, I love it. I mean, my gosh, we could talk. It's such a big topic and you're such a compelling, inspiring, passionate human to be speaking to about this. I love it. So really quickly, just to wrap us up and leave us on a high. So lots of work to be done, lots of challenges out there. What are some trends that are inspiring you at the moment, that actually lift your heart, that are some things that we can all be aiming for?
Yeah, so the big thing for me is having an opinion. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I'm really loving where I see organizations having a view, an authentic view about why they are involved in this space, how it links to their values, and that the work that they need to do to implement it. So for me, it's around reading the room around how we speak, particularly from a generational perspective, to authenticity. So I love where I see it. I love where people have the confidence to say, I haven't got it. I need to do more in this space. We don't have the answers. That in a very underperforming sector is a massively attractive trend, and I love to see it because it invites help, it invites collaboration, it invites all of those things that we need to progress, instead of pretending that you're doing wonderfully and you're going to get tripped up in 2025 when you unpack that and people go, well, we're all the underrepresented demographics. And what is concerning me is obviously around data capture, how clear we are on what it is that we're trying to solve, and the performance management, the so what. Does this matter? Does it, what happens if we don't achieve what we're trying to achieve? Who shares this within the organization? Is it just a HR problem, or is it a business-wide problem? So that those would be sort of the pros and cons of some of the big trends that I'm seeing across sectors at the moment.
Love it. And I'm going to ask a sort of a final question, because you hooked us right at the start with sharing your story and your context, which immediately just means we're safe with what you're sharing with us, because you can tell it comes from a genuine kind of place. So Debs and I, on our Secrets from a Coach podcast, we love asking any of our guests this question, and I think it's particularly poignant given the way you introduced yourself at the start. If you could go back to the 16-year-old version of yourself,
okay,
what would be the message you will want to keep reminding yourself of? Now you know what you know, and you've seen what you've seen, and here we are in 2022. What would be the message that you would have loved to have seen or heard been given to you as a 16-year-old back then?
So what I would say to myself is it's all temporary. So what it looks like, feels like, sounds like in those moments is not how it will always feel, how it will always be. Things move, things change, society change, positions change. So for however it feels in those moments, that just take real comfort from the fact that each of those moments, each of those challenges, each of those issues is temporary. It does pass. And just hang in there.
Oh, Ed, I can imagine it's been a long time since I was 16, but I can imagine it's quite a challenge being a 16-year-old at this point in time. So that goes out for all those people who have 16-year-olds in their life. And thanks, Ed. It's been the most wonderful conversation with you. So thank you so much.
No, I've loved it.
Ed,
Thanks so much for having me.
You both so much. I could sit and listen to you all day. Ed has to run there at 4:00. So we might just have time for one question that was sent in. And I suppose it's relating to, as you've addressed, kind of, I suppose, our audience in the manufacturing industry. Like, a lot of these guys are just kind of touching on, maybe even the start of their ESG journey. And I suppose the social side of it is very much kind of like, involved in that. So just in a nutshell, how difficult would it be to implement a D&I strategy into your organization?
Well, that's what we specialize in. So from a D&I perspective, we take a 6-stage approach, and I'll not bore you with all of the details, but it starts with leadership, because you get a couple of different camps from a leadership perspective. It's hard for leaders in this day and age to say it isn't a good idea, right? So everybody, that's a good idea. That's what we should be doing. So it's about switching leadership from sort of passive sponsorship. That's a good idea, we should do it, palm it off to HR and somebody else, go fix it, to an active sponsorship, which is finding out at a leadership and an organizational and a strategy perspective, why are you doing this? Why is it important to you? Why is it important to your people? How do you become active in this space? And people panic, because especially at leadership level, you ask them to talk about complex topics, race, sexual orientation, LGBTQIA plus issues, and they go, HR, somebody else. So it's
don't want to address it. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we've got to create that psychological safety that we were talking about with leaders to make sure that we can create an environment where it's going to fly. The rest is just logistics. We need to get our heads back to the fact that from a strategy perspective, in your businesses today, you're solving problems, you're reacting to client issues, you've got brilliant talent in your organization. We just need to switch them on to these issues, fire
Yeah.
them up under a strategy perspective. And so that's what we do for a day job. So if anybody wants to know
Brilliant.
about any of that or any of the sort of 6 stages that go with that, that's essentially what we're here for.
Perfect. Ed and Laura, it was absolutely brilliant. Ed, really inspirational. If anyone has any questions, I know Ed unfortunately has to run now, and
I do have to drop off.
We can sit and listen to both of them all
Mwah.
day, and I just we'll send you over any questions that come through, and please send them through after. We'll be sending the replay of the recording to all the attendees. So thank you so much.
Loved it.
It was an absolute pleasure to have you both on, and yeah, really, really enjoyed it. So thank you guys. It was
Thanks so much.
fantastic.
Speak
Have you.
soon.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye. 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 Bye.